If someone had asked me 6 months ago whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation, of course. We had been married for 11 years. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, Colorado. We had routines that felt comforting: morning coffee, weekend grocery trips, and movie nights that usually ended with one of us falling asleep on the couch. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back, the signs were there. Mark had started taking phone calls outside. He suddenly changed every password. He became strangely interested in our finances, insisting that he would handle everything. Whenever I asked questions, he smiled and said, "You're worrying too much." I wanted to believe him. Marriage, I thought, required trust. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I'd forgotten my tablet at home and came back during my lunch break. The house was quiet. As I walked toward the bedroom, I heard Mark talking on the phone. His voice was low. "I've already met with the attorney twice," he said. I froze. "We're just waiting until the paperwork is ready. She has no idea." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rest. I don't want her making this difficult. I quietly backed away before he saw me. I sat in my car for almost 30 minutes. I wasn't crying, I wasn't angry. I was simply trying to understand how someone could be planning the end of our marriage while still kissing me goodbye every morning. That evening, I acted completely normal. I cooked dinner. We talked about work. He even asked me what movie I wanted to watch that weekend. The entire time, I wondered how many lies could fit inside one conversation. For the next week, I paid attention instead of asking questions. He stayed late at work more often. He started receiving certified mail at his office instead of our home. He carried a folder everywhere. I stopped assuming, observing. Then I made a decision. If he was preparing for a future without me, I would prepare for one too. Without telling him, I scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney. I almost canceled. Part of me felt guilty. Another part reminded me that he hadn't felt guilty planning a divorce behind my back. The attorney listened quietly while I explained everything. Then she asked one simple question. "Do you know exactly what your financial situation is?" I realized I didn't. Not completely. For years, I had trusted Mark to manage our investments, retirement accounts, and savings. I knew we were comfortable. I didn't know the details. That meeting changed everything. The attorney didn't tell me to fight. She didn't encourage revenge. She simply handed me a checklist. Collect copies of financial records. Know every account. Understand your legal rights. Protect your future before emotions take over. For the next month, I quietly followed every step. I copied tax returns, downloaded bank statements, reviewed mortgage documents, checked retirement accounts. I learned more about our finances in 4 weeks than I had in 11 years. What surprised me most wasn't what I found. It was what I didn't find. Several accounts I remembered discussing years earlier were gone. Money had been moved. New investments existed that I had never heard about. Nothing appeared obviously illegal. But almost everything had changed without my knowledge. When I showed the documents to my attorney, she looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "I think your husband believes he's controlling the story." She paused, "But the paperwork tells a much more interesting one." At that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one quietly making plans. I looked at my attorney, trying to read her expression. "What do you mean?" I asked. She turned one of the financial statements toward me. "Your husband has been preparing for a divorce," she said calmly, "but he seems to have forgotten that marriage is a legal partnership. The court looks at facts, not surprises." For the first time in weeks, I felt my breathing slow. She explained that many of the assets Mark thought he had quietly rearranged were still subject to disclosure. Hiding information or assuming I wouldn't ask questions wouldn't erase my rights. The law expected honesty from both of us. That wasn't the dramatic answer I thought I wanted. It was better. It reminded me that I didn't have to outsmart him. I only had to stay informed. Over the next few weeks, I followed every piece of advice my attorney gave me. I opened a bank account in my own name. I gathered important personal documents and stored copies somewhere safe. I reviewed my credit report and began creating a realistic monthly budget. Those small steps changed something inside me. Instead of waking up wondering what Mark might do next, I woke up asking myself what I needed to do for my own future. One evening, he came home unusually cheerful. "I've got something important to talk to you about," he said. I already knew what was coming. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, where we had shared thousands of meals. He folded his hands together. "I think we've grown apart," he began. "I've decided it's time for a divorce." He watched my face carefully, almost as if he expected me to panic. I simply nodded. "I understand," I said. His eyebrows lifted. "That's all? I've had some time to think too." For a moment, he looked confused. Then he slid a stack of papers across the table. "I've already had these prepared. I didn't touch them. My attorney will review everything," I replied. The word attorney seemed to catch him completely off guard. "You have a lawyer?" Yes, the confidence disappeared from his face. Over the next several months, every financial document had to be disclosed, every account had to be explained, every decision that affected our shared finances had to be documented. I never argued, I never insulted him. Whenever emotions started rising, I reminded myself why I was there, not to win against him, but to protect myself. That quiet mindset became my greatest strength. There were difficult days, of course. Some mornings I questioned everything. Had I ignored too many warning signs? Should I have spoken up sooner? But every time those thoughts appeared, I reminded myself that regret couldn't build a future. Only action could. The divorce was finalized nearly a year after I first overheard that phone call. When I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Free from wondering where I stood. Free from depending on someone else's honesty. Free to make decisions without fear. A few months later, I rented a small townhouse filled with sunlight. I bought furniture one piece at a time. Nothing was expensive. Everything belonged to me. On weekends, I planted flowers on the patio and drank coffee in the mornings without feeling anxious every time my phone buzzed. Friends asked me how I stayed so calm through everything. I always gave the same answer. I stopped trying to save a marriage that one person had already left. That wasn't giving up. It was choosing myself. Looking back, I realized the biggest surprise wasn't that Mark had planned our divorce before telling me. The biggest surprise was discovering that I was far stronger than I had ever believed. His secret planning didn't define my future. My quiet preparation did. I learned that dignity doesn't come from having the light. It comes from knowing your worth, protecting your peace, and refusing to let someone else's choices decide your future. Silence became my loudest answer, not because I had nothing to say, but because my next chapter spoke louder than any argument ever could. If this story touched you, please comment and subscribe. I have one question for you. Have you ever trusted your instincts even before you had proof? Let me know your answer below.